All right, hello all. I'm going to go ahead and put our slides up, and we'll do some quick introductions before that. There we go. Can everybody see these slides okay?
Not yet.
No.
You're not in slide mode.
Okay. Let me try this one more time. How about that?
Yes.
Hooray.
All right.
All right. Let's see here. So, would you like to kick us off there, Suzanne?
I would. Could you move to the next slide, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So hello, everybody, and thank you for coming to this session today. My name is Suzanne Sebring, and I'm the Director of Post-Secondary Engagement had a recent job title change, so it says Career Pathways Manager in the program. And I am with the San Diego and Imperial County Regional Consortium. And my partners today are Uta Mashka and Greg Hill Jr. So I'm going to pause and let them introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about them. Uta?
Good morning, small but mighty crowd. I'm Uta Mashka. I'm the manager for East Region Adult Education, which is in the East Region of San Diego.
And I am Greg Hill Jr. I'm a senior program manager at West Ed, and I work predominantly in the areas of post-secondary education and adult ed. And it's really lovely to be here.
Thank you. So our goals for today are to highlight our efforts to develop and streamline career education pathways within the San Diego and Imperial County region. We also want to share the process and the framework for facilitating vertical and horizontal alignment across our segments, and share lessons learned and next steps. So I'll turn it over to Greg to do a little welcome and introductions warm-up.
Thank you, Suzanne. So we'll try to keep this brief. Mostly, we're just kind of hoping to get a better sense of who's in the room and to help us ensure that we're, in our discussion, that we're sort of focusing on the questions that you may have, some of the information you may be wishing to learn. So what I'd like to do is just quickly put a prompt in the chat, and then have you not exactly waterfall it, but waterfall it. Just sort of what is it that brought you to this session, and what were you hoping to learn, better understand, or do? And if folks could just sort of pop that in, that would be a great help to us as we can tailor that conversation. So go. Marvelous, thank you. SIP goals, interesting. There we go. Yep. Pathway group, starting something similar. Oh, F, okay. I'll be curious to hear what consortium you're part of there. Sarah, Stronger Employment Training Partner. Excelsior, nice. And how many people do we have? Is this? We've got Alfred, got a couple other folks. Can we get one more? There we go. Jill, thank you so much. As we move through, beautiful, Mid Alameda. You're with Mid Al. Oh, yeah, of course. Marvelous. Excellent. Good. Yeah, I know there's some good work happening over there in this arena too. Thank you, Lydia. Okay, thank you all so much for participating here. And if there are, questions, or if you realize, what, actually, this is an area I'd like to get more information on, at any point, feel free to pop it in the chat or chat any of us really directly, and we'll circulate that among the group and see what we can to help accommodate you. All right, so let's see here. Moving forward, Uta, you want to talk us through this next few slides?
So by way of diving deeper in our topic, we wanted to provide a brief overview of who we are. We call ourselves shamelessly the super region in San Diego and Imperial County. We are a region of various adult education consortia. You can see them there on this slide. 6 regional consortia serving about 75,000 students across the various CAPE program areas. What is not unique to our area, but still very important to consider, is that our areas cover extreme poverty and extreme wealth, rural and urban, with or without access to career training programs, to connectivity, to adult education programs overall. We've been working as a super region for the last 5 years, meeting monthly on a very regular basis. Next. Which, when we talk about the super region, brings us to a question that we ask ourselves frequently as well: why collaborate at the regional level? So we were curious what you might think about this. What would be the point? Why is it a good idea, or is it a good idea to collaborate regionally? We would like to ask you all for your suggestions how to answer this question. We would like to give you about a minute to think about it, or maybe a little less, and then try to do a waterfall in the chat so that we have input from all of us at the same time. So the question: why collaborate at the regional level across adult ed consortia? What do you think? Put it in the chat.
Yep.
Whatever. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I like that, reduce redundancy.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. I like that. Reduce thinking that regionally serve students more effectively if they attack. Yeah, that's good. Leverage funds. A couple with reduced redundancy. You know, I'm super curious about that. This is a pretty common thread. It goes back to the beginning. I'd really be curious to explore whether there is meaningful redundancy the way that we often think there is.
Yeah, and I also, Lydia pointed out, right, that there are challenges that we're facing across the region, which for me is an interesting and important point to make, which leads to the question: if that's the fact, what do we do regional to face those overarching issues and are still student-centered and tailor our services to individual students? So yeah, I think we are meeting with the same sort of purpose, right? To review what are our resources that we can leverage. How can we support each other across the region and globally? And how do we address the challenges in a meaningful, sustainable manner?
Mm-hmm.
So let's dive deeper then. One of the issues we want to address intentionally and consistently is equity. Right? We believe that we cannot talk about addressing regional issues. We cannot talk about equity without including adult education in our conversations. So our work collaboratively across the region is also with the intention to increase equitable opportunities for all of us. And with that, I hand it over to Greg.
Thanks, Uta. So, as is pretty well known to most of you on the call, I would imagine, right? In thinking about, you know, standardizing or aligning cross-segmentally in particular, but even, you know, across adult ed, there are some unique qualities, right, that make that kind of activity somewhat difficult, right? And here are just sort of a handful of what some of those challenges are, right? Comparability in terms of just shared nomenclature. You know, what I call a program and you call a program might be the same thing, but in terms of what we actually provide, there's no guarantee they're at all the same. Right? There's limited standardization around program level data collection and reporting. We understand that data moves in different directions. You know, some goes to CASAS, right? If you're WIOA funded, some goes to, you know, the state and ends up in Launch Board. But, you know, there's nowhere you can find CTE data, for example, right? There we go, Kim. We're going to invite you to this next time, yes. Actually, too. I'm only half joking about that. In fact, I'm not sure that I am joking about that. I would love to speak more with you about that too. You know, yeah, lack of clarity around goals of adult ed, program areas, and populations. You know, not everybody shares the same. There isn't always a shared understanding, right, of who is being served, right? What adult ed is and intends to do, especially again across segments. And I also want to just sort of note that populations piece in particular. We often define adult learners by demographic characteristics. And if you look across segments, it's really easy to reduce people to specific ones. But in truth, adult learners are complicated. And there are nuances in terms of nuanced differences among the populations that aren't necessarily captured by those variables. But those who actually serve adult ed students really understand that better. So this is all to say that, you know, some specialized attention to really understanding who those populations are is really key to being able to build meaningful pathways. And, you know, finally, misconceptions among K-12 and post-secondary around AE offerings and where to put AE, right? So, you know, I'll often think about the, you know, state master plan for education. And it's sort of, I'd say at the top of it is, you know, UC, CSU, you know, community college system, and then K-12. And one of the popular things to do is sort of wedge adult ed in there somewhere. But if you think about the array of what adult ed provides within the state of California, it doesn't quite work there, right? In some of what adult ed does, sure, fine. In other aspects of adult ed, not so much, right? The way that students move through segments isn't exactly linear, and adult ed is, you know, one of the mechanisms whereby you know, adult learners and professionals can continue to sort of upskill and even you know, develop and get additional training for fundamental shifts in careers. And so it's more complicated than I think it can sometimes appear on paper. Oh, I want to get to this SIP thing, Kim. Okay, so, and actually that's a really nice transition. So one of the things that we did to sort of begin the alignment process is sort of ask the question, well, okay, if we agree that there is a sort of certain challenge around shared nomenclature, right? So what can we do to get everybody on a sort of semi-similar page? And the thing that everybody agreed on ultimately is that we're in the business of trying to get adult learners into careers, right? And by the way, I think it was pretty clear, but the strong workforce obviously is focused on CTE training, so that was also informing our decision-making. So we worked backwards from there. Before I continue, I did just want to make mention that the model and the work that we did is very much informed by others, by a bunch of other people, including some folks, colleagues of mine, Blair Toso, Randy Tillery, Ali Balela, just to name a few. Just wanted to make sure that was understood, and that, you know, as a whole, we appreciate all their efforts leading into it and sort of helping with design and so forth. Anyway, we had so thinking backwards from jobs. So we decided to think, well, okay, SOC codes give us the occupations that students ideally will end up getting into. But how do we actually winnow down the array of courses and offerings in adult ed to sort of zero in on where the sort of comparisons can happen. And so we created this classification system, right? Which those of you in community college, may find similar to what is in MIS is a SAM code, right? So there's, tier 1 is workforce preparation, right? So these would be employability, general skills necessary for the workforce. So it might be typing, it might be, what's another good example? Workshops that are, resume workshops, things like that, that we understand are really important, but may not be necessary, or not necessary, I take it back, that may not reasonably be said to be part of an educational pathway or coherent course leading to a very specific job. Next here would be occupational skills builder. Don't confuse this with the concept of a skills builder. That's not how we're using it. But rather this would be something like, training that would provide core occupational skills or competencies that either augment or expand previous education or training. Refresher courses might fit into this. Other, professional development, or certification courses for individuals who are already within, a career. This happens a lot in nursing, for example. And so like here, and before I move too far, just thinking about some of the questions that help to sort of frame these tiers. And then lastly, occupational training program. And this is what we really wanted to get to be able to sort of take all of the component parts and put them together and or highlight the sort of coherent sort of courses that already existed so that we can do that comparison. So like tier 3 is basically courses or sequences of sufficient duration and intensity that develop skills for an individual to enter or advance in a specific occupation or industry. And I think this is where, if the other two tiers were somewhat unclear, the guiding question for this one, I think, clarifies all of it pretty well. Does the offering prepare students to enter directly into the job that it is designed to train them for, right? And so the example here, numeracy, very important for any number of pathways or, career, OTPs. GMA is one type of welding, right? But if we're really thinking about, well, what's going to get somebody fully into a career, we're really looking for welding, right? Which might be inclusive of 2 or more of these particular certifications. I'm going to pause here to make sure all that's clear. And also, Uta, I'm watching you, and I think you're going to provide important context.
Yeah, I want to chime in very briefly. What looks kind of straightforward here is for us was actually a longer and pretty rigorous process, right? Where what drove us is the question, what is the occupation? What is a job that is an adult learner can step into because of our training, without any delays, without any additional trainings that they would need. So for me at least, it was a very helpful and not so often occurring experience in backward design. Right? Mm-hmm. A very disciplined process where I look at the job that's out there and map it back, and need to be very honest in the conversation. Do we provide this training or not? Or do we provide it almost, but something is missing, right? So, and welding is an interesting case because it can go into various job positions. So the backward design and the framework for how we address this has to be pretty rigorous.
Yep. And to your point, and I think in the San Diego Imperial region, this is particularly notable because if we're thinking about, some of the industries that are sort of growing in California and in some cases in San Diego, right? If we're thinking about welding, that might lead to a job in somewhere in advanced manufacturing or some such, right? But at the same time, in San Diego, there's a lot of welding that happens in shipyards, right? And that is a slightly different path. And so starting with the job really also provided an opportunity for folks to talk about, where are my students actually getting jobs? What am I genuinely preparing them for? Is my course actually somewhat different than the sort of courses that are offered by the same name? Are they leading to different outcomes? And that is something we're still kind of working. But after that sort of initial process of winnowing down, right? Well, what are we actually going to compare? We then clustered, right? So sticking with welding, if based on conversations like, actually, this is an essential, numeracy is an essential part of our welding, course or occupational training program, then what, the next step was to sort of cluster these into that occupational training program. So it's like, okay, by our, it's for the purposes of comparison, we are going to sort of chunk these together as the sort of, this is what students need to get to where, to the job we say we're training them for. And then that's where the comparisons happen and the coding occurred. In terms of the coding, and this goes to a little bit, Kim, what you had raised here, if I'm understanding you correctly, mentioned using the SIP model. Are you talking about using SIP codes, perhaps? But I'm going to pretend like you were. There are a number of different ways you can sort of code information, right? So rest of the country uses SIP codes, academic classifications. California does not, right? We have top codes at the community college level, and then there's A22 codes for adult schools. And they vary in terms of their comprehensiveness and ultimately, I think, accuracy, right? It's level of detail, right? Differences. If we're ever going to talk about aligning, especially vertically, right, which is to say 2 community college credit courses or credit pathways, then we, again, had to be able to get on the same page around what we're calling, how we're coding, right, these opportunities, educational opportunities. And so echoing what Uta said, we worked backwards from SOC. And so standard occupational classifications, I'm sure all of you are already familiar with, so I won't belabor it, but we started there. Okay, occupational training programs lead to which jobs? And then from there, we backed into a sort of triangulated sort of coding process. So, okay, these SOC codes align to taxonomy of program codes in what ways, right? They align to A22 in what ways? And sort of through that recursive process, we're able to sort of identify consonances as well as dissonances and sort of, collaboratively and over time work to try to resolve them slightly. And again, it's still something we're working on. But the process was really important and I think unique in that, well, for a bunch of reasons. And I'll pause there. Before I move to the next slide, are there any questions that I can try to help to address? Okay, so Jill's asking, classification. I'm curious if you found gaps in your training for a given occupation. Did you make programmatic changes to close those gaps or did you make what you had fit? Oh, Uta, can you answer that?
Yes, and we'll get to that a little later too. Yes to all of it, right? It's an ongoing conversation and process. We did find gaps. Some of it might also be geographic and geographically differing models of what's offered where. Mm-hmm. We needed to adjust some of the outcomes for our CTE classes quite dramatically. And in the conversation in our group, we also are exploring the assignment of hours, the fees, the language we use to describe the same training programs. So it's yes to all of these aspects. And we'll come We'll show you in a moment what that looks like.
Perfect. Yes, thank you, Tim. Maren, is this around career pathways, community college, as well as adult schools? Oh, such a great question. So in a sense, yes. When we say occupational training program, it is more or less how it is the structure. We're essentially saying pathway. It just, but the difference being that how courses and programs are delivered in adult ed are somewhat different often than in community colleges, right? And you'll notice I even stumble over terms like courses and programs, right? Because these have different meanings. So you'll have a course that spans an entire year in adult ed that leads to, you know, a specific job. Whereas in a community college, we would, and that course might have multiple modules, right? Or, you know, what might be a class or is a set of classes, you know, but then in the community college, those component parts are typically broken up. There's a more structured or sort of semester type system. And so we wanted to be able to, so we didn't use that nomenclature because also we're thinking in terms of pathways leading through. So how about pathways among, yeah, thank you. Brilliant. Yes, pathways among adult schools and colleges. Yes, vertical, horizontal. And that's just like the triangulation that's happening here in terms of the coding. That is indeed what we're doing, trying to do in real life as well. Bi-directional. Oh, thank you.
Let's show you some more.
Yeah. we're coming up to all that good stuff.
Suzanne, do you want to talk through some of the lessons we learned?
Absolutely. So we found that course coding was one essential step toward pathway mapping. So both horizontal among adult schools and non-credit, as well as vertical between adult schools and community colleges. Mapping to the SOC codes helped participants focus on the end goal of employment. And also, you know, the lack of shared nomenclature, as you have spoken to in the chat as well. And classification systems for the educational training programs within and across the segments remains a challenge, but something that we're working on. Digging deeper into the surface level alignments to assess the comparability, standardize and integrate those things into a coherent region-wide pathway is even more difficult in the absence of a common source for programmatic information. And that is what made developing and keeping the data repository up to date so important. There was no other area that captured those CTE programs for adult ed in one location. Mm-hmm. The repository helped begin the conversation to address questions like how and to what extent do we need to align the classes? How do we leverage similar but different educational opportunities? How do we measure the value and the quality of courses in hours or certifications? What is the value of the skills learner courses versus occupational training courses? Where do those different opportunities live? We wanted to have a refined understanding of different student populations among the members. There's different needs for different student groups. So we wanted to kind of understand that. And this process that we went into over a year ago to start developing the repository across our region, make sure that everything was, all the CTE programs and courses were in there and accurate, promoted discussion across the members. It opened up programmatic conversations and among instructors and refined marketing messages for students and employers. That's in progress as we're just embarking on the horizontal alignment piece. And it's going to provide focus on program planning. And that's not, as you mentioned, it's not just like adult ed to community college. it can be inverse as well. Our students have a lot of different on and off ramps. And once they perhaps are trained in, say, as a CNA, and if they go into maybe the transition and do a LPN program at a community college and they're in the workforce, there are certifications that they need as they go through their career that they could come back to the adult school to get those types of certifications. So there's a lot of different options, and it's not just one way. It is both, both bidirectional, as you had mentioned in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, I'm sorry, go ahead, Greg.
Sarah, interject quickly. I'm realizing, I totally forgot to mention the fact that we did something with the data, which Suzanne just alluded to, right? We, because there wasn't a central repository, we made one and identified groups of individuals who are tasked with maintaining it. I think most of them are consortium leads. At least half, if not more than that, are consortium leads who are periodically convened and have discussions about what's there and so on. And there's a screenshot of it in a couple slides from here, and we'll get to that in just a second. Sorry. So, okay, Suzanne, do you want to take that next slide too?
Sure. So we realized that if the region was to be successful at alignment, it would need to have those conversations. Adult ed, as I had kind of alluded to in the previous slide, contains full CTE programs leading to jobs, as you know. Initial pathways that lead to community college programs, as well as certifications that working individuals need to keep themselves up to date. And our aim is to identify how all of our educational systems contribute to the student journey and work together to make options easier to understand for our students and easier to navigate. Another way we can meet the student need is stacked credentialing with multiple entry and exit points, where students can train, they can go to work, they can upskill, deal with unique life needs. And then sometimes that means that the student may have to pause on their education. We need to give them the opportunity to pick up where they left off and continue toward their goals. So again, that speaks to that interwoven, bidirectional type of collaboration approach that we are striving for in our region.
Suzanne, there's a question here I'm going to toss up from Marin. Could you explain more? Also, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. I hope that's, just a way. Saying, could you explain more about course coding and why it was essential? This is the question. I'm thinking, Uta, can you address this? You're really in the thick of it.
I think that is indeed the question. So for various reasons, and thank you for bringing it up, if there were two main reasons for us as a super region. Number one, adult career training programs weren't really in a cohesive system or accessible across the region. We didn't have a shared container, a shared repository, a reference. We didn't sometimes even know what we were really talking about when we said, I have welding and you have welding. Right? Mm-hmm. So we needed a baseline, a foundation for conversations to get to the point where we can start thinking about alignment with the colleges and bi-directional exchange and resources. The second reason, the Centers of Excellence for Labor Market Research puts out really, really important data on what's available, which training programs are available, which jobs are available, what is the outlook. And regularly in these presentations, career training paths, career training programs that we at adult schools knew we were offering did not show up. right? So for example, a very strong CNA program that we have in our region, those pretty impressive numbers of training completers were not counted anywhere, which created a pretty important or crucial, dangerous lack of resources available, or gap, resources available, training positions available, jobs to be filled, right? So for us to get sound data from the labor market research experts, we needed to show them what we have. When we showed them what we have, we didn't have any codes. So labor market research analysts couldn't really help us because they couldn't search for anything. So coding became important for research data that is sound and accurate. And coding became important for any possible alignment with the colleges or even with industry partners. Industry partners have an understanding of SOB, but not necessarily of our educational coding systems.
I would add to that also that one of the goals is also to have, now that adult ed has that repository, has that coding, it creates a better crosswalk. And for instance, the regional consortium, San Diego and Imperial County Regional Consortium has a program finder tool that currently has all of the community college programs in there. So students or counselors can search and see where the programs are, what they entail. We are working right now, or we've been working to build out that tool to include our K-12 pathways and our adult ed programs and courses, so that it really is like a one-stop shop for educational opportunities in our region that can see, you know, what pathways align, you know, between K-12 and the adult ed, between adult ed and community colleges, K-12 to community colleges, and again, bidirectionally. So this is another one of our end goals, and why it was important to have that coding done, because it's going to help us do that crosswalk and make this tool possible.
Thank you. Yeah, does that, I hope that helps, Maren, and we are going to get a little more into this too. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, see, it's good. Yes. In fact, let me just, this is what it looks like, and then I'll go back. So what we did is we created it in Google. Since everybody had access, it would be easy to maintain. You know, I don't know if it'll stay there forever, but it's working pretty decently for now. Each agency was given a worksheet that they would populate, you know, based on with a number, populate that based on what they were offering. And there are a number of fields here, some of which aren't listed, and we actually added some additional ones, separated others out over the last, you know, year or so. You know, so for example, we have duration in weeks, hours of instruction. We've since added, you know, internship, externship hours. We've added, I want to say, oh yeah, whether it's IET or IELCE. I think we can probably share. I'd have to check permissions, but minimally, if you're interested in a copy, I don't see a problem providing that as well. Oh, that is what you're asking. Sorry, I missed copy. I don't see a problem with that personally, but I'll need to circle around with the folks who are the owners ultimately. But yeah, be glad to share any of the info. Yeah, I was gonna say, it's not really sensitive, right? It's just sort of, it's doing due diligence, but absolutely, be glad to. Let's see here. There are a few other fields too that we added just based on learnings derived from using it and trying to have those conversations. There are other fields that we may well, you know, in the long term kind of move away from as well. The goal here ultimately was, what can we put together that would be accurate and easily enough maintained? and frankly would be organized in a way that would help make it usable for the more important conversations that were needed to be had among adult schools, community colleges. We wanted it to be a tool that was indeed used and not an academic exercise that sat on, where the results sat on a shelf somewhere and people referred to as a thing they did several years back, which is often the case.
So to Maren's point, right, good, very important question. Who would use this? So this is not student user facing. This is an internal tool for our super region and assigned persons to start, continue, develop conversations. Right? Toward what Suzanne already mentioned, eventually a program finder that will be user facing. As before, I think for me, it has always been very important and helpful to keep in mind that notion of backward design, right? But when we discuss what do we want to include in this repository and avoid that this repository becomes this gigantic file folder, we needed to focus on the occupation that's at the end of this pathway or this path, right? What is the job my student will be able to take based on the training I offer? And what do I need to know as a student? What do I need to know as an advisor to share with a student about this class, right? So aside, in addition to codes, there needed to be a title, there needed to be a description, the duration of that class, the hours associated with that course or program, any certificates, that is something we added in later, right? Industry recognized certificates that were aligned with that class. Always with the focus, what does the student need? How do we prepare the student for the actual position that's at the end of this path?
Excellent. You can see if it doesn't include it yet.
Yeah, we could do that.
Yeah, just to echo though, we are in the process of kind of adjusting. And so, yeah.
Jill, with your permission, can we hold off with this question? We'll come back to it. I think we might want to show some other steps we have taken in the meantime to arrive at that next question. Thank you, Jill.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to step back here to so that Suzanne, you can talk through where we've gone.
Great.
Where we're going. Sorry. Let me go back.
Okay. So this is kind of our steps from creating the repository to the communities of practice. And it displays the overall data project. In phase 1, those are items that we've already completed. So in the light yellow, including establishing the central location for the programs and populating the repository with adult ed CTE. And so that was the repository that you just saw, where we populated all the programs, identified the codes, the A22 codes, the top codes, and the SOC codes. So what jobs those OTPs leaded to. In addition, we were doing the coding alignment work, which was integrating non-credit into the repository at the community colleges. We kind of reviewed and discussed and determined the approach to integration and expanded the group to include all CCs. So that's, that's something that we needed to do because there are non-credit programs at community colleges that are, similar or the same as some of the adult ed programs. So we needed to see what those differences were and what the outcomes of those courses and programs were. So we created the community of practice that, as Greg said earlier, it's mostly consortium leads. There's also some others, like there's data art, for one of our consortiums, we have actually a data manager. And so that is the person that is representing that consortium at these meetings. But in these community of practice meetings, we talked about the process and what would be most effective in keeping the tool up to date and the frequency it would need to be updated. Those kinds of decisions were made with that community of practice. And then, you know, having some of the leadership engagement, making sure that everyone knew what was happening. That was through different forms. One is the super region meetings that we had, also the data community of practice members going back to their schools and talking to their administrators to make sure that everyone was on board and knew what the program was attempting to do. And then the next step, which is phase 2, that's happening this year, is prioritizing the programs, deciding on an approach for aligning horizontally. That's our first step, is to horizontally align among adult school and non-credit. And the first, we'll get to it for, you know, as we move forward, but the first area that we are tackling as a region is health. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on with the presentation. So also in phase 2, we're coordinating with the developer to define fields and upload that CTE data into that program finder tool. And we'll be able to at least provide a link or even bring it up at the end here for, you know, during questions. But I can show you what the program finder tool looks like currently with just the community colleges in there, and our plans to expand. We're working on wireframes right now for how all of that information is going to look when we include K-12 and adult education into that tool. We are conducting, again, our horizontal alignment this year, starting with health. And we are trying to adapt and improve our programs and practices as we do this work, and you know, and as we learn where those alignments are, where they're a little different, but maybe the same program is 400 hours over here and 200 hours over here. We're needing to have those conversations to determine, is it because one includes, you know, external internships? Is it because, why is there that difference? And do we need to maybe change the name so it's easier for students to identify what those differences are? Or is there a need for some curriculum alignment? So that's one of the things we're doing this year. So in phase 3, we're wanting to, which is, you know, our plan for next year is to maintain the accurate information in the program finder, making sure we have a system to pull in the adult education data into that system that's up to date, you know, and that everything is working as we hope it will be in that new tool that includes all the different levels, the K-12, the adult ed, and the community colleges. We're going to be then starting after we finish the horizontal alignment for all of our programs, we're going to start the vertical alignment. So between adult education and the community colleges to see, to try and complete those pathways, make sure that there's no gaps, see what needs to be addressed, to make sure that the students that want to transition into post-secondary have a clear and complete pathway. And again, some pathways may go right to employment. So it's a both and situation when we're looking at this information. And then ongoing sharing and program implementation and program improvement as we move forward. And on the right, you'll see kind of our overarching goals on the project.
And, you know, to quickly chime in,
yeah,
I really like, just thinking, Uta, you had mentioned, you know, it's the repository isn't outward facing. And what comes to mind for me is, you know, the importance of having both, right? Something that can help convey or, you know, make visible what opportunities are available to prospective students, as well as, you know, have something that is a touchstone for all of us who are developing these programs. And, you know, so harking back to that original question, why do the coding at all. You know, I just keep thinking, well, if internally we don't know what the pathways look like, then students won't either. And so it's also itself kind of a sort of a reflexive process that, you know, and I think what's unique about we followed is it really does take that endpoint of the student's journey, like, you know, as the sort of shared focus. Anyway.
If I may add to this, yes, because it's also the way for us, I think, to avoid adult ed being wedged into something and matter on its own accounts and in alignment with other systems. So the end and the both end is important, right? Because that's where adult education thrives, that a path can lead directly into employment and is a complete path. The path can also be extended and become a more extensive, if you will, more complete path by leading into college and aligning with career training programs at the colleges, or preparing someone from adult ed for a university program. Right? So adult ed has that very important, unique space for adult learners. And that coding project, which led to the repository, which leads to a finder, is exactly this sort of way we can carve out or want to consolidate for adult education.
And it's a long process, you know. Yeah, I mean, you can see it's been a couple of years to get where we are, but it's been a good one. Let's see if we can go next. We've seen the repository. Okay, so here is sort of just an example of some of what the repository has kind of yielded. We're moving into some that alignment work. Okay. Yeah, that alignment work, more substantive alignment work, and having that sort of initial phase, sort of massaging and curating is what's making that possible. And so we're starting with health. I feel like, yeah, I'm getting so much feedback and I feel really terrible about this and I don't know how to fix it. Is this any better? Better, worse? Better? Okay, cool. Thank you. So just sort of taking a look here, the repository really kind of moved us and sort of an initial coding clustering process and the conversations that have ensued between them have really set us up for the conversations we're going to have moving forward. And even just based on what we have, there was that early question about, you know, what gaps are you seeing? You know, just having a place to go, right, shows us quickly, well, what are gaps what gaps are there? And by the way, you know, literally I did this in 3 seconds. You know what I mean? Like it was like I just connected it. It's a pivot table, and could see, wow, there's only one registered nursing program in the entire region across San Diego and Imperial that is at a non-credit, right? That is not credit bearing necessarily. And you know, similar things with you know, optical training. I don't know exactly what the needs are, but that's only at a college, right? So, et cetera, et cetera. And so again, we're moving into, and thank you, Beth, a next, and Mara, into our next phase. We're really going to zoom in more into the substance of what differentiates or doesn't differentiate some of these occupational training programs. And, you know, and that's when the hard conversations are really going to occur. In the end, what we're kind of really hoping to see is, yeah, to see folks collectively get on board with making changes to their programs based on a shared understanding of what the needs are. In, you know, some of that might be really substantive, right? Where it's, understanding we need to augment or adjust our courses or deliver them very differently than we currently do. It may also, result in changes in how the programs are presented to students. We look at, go to any adult ed website and, you'll see many of the same programs, but in some cases, it's just sort of slightly different descriptions or slightly different titles. In some cases, very different titles, very creative ones. But, is that actually, helping students understand what's being offered, and shouldn't they be able to sort of compare apples to oranges on them, on their own? Likewise, another end goal here is to sort of see, mentioning this sort of for that sort of not bidirectional, but adult school to adult school type alignment. You'll often, folks, I often think about how, a student can enroll in a college and that student can transfer to another college and bring credits with them. That isn't necessarily true of adult ed, right? Wouldn't it be quite a thing to be able to have someone begin a program, a robust, occupational training program at one adult school, and then if circumstances dictate a move, that they'd actually be able to finish it, right, at a partner adult school, with the knowledge that, yes, we all understand our curriculum is aligned and we have those on and off points and did that intentionally, right? So I'll pause there. So Marin asks, are the CTE pathways in adult schools all based off? Yeah. No, no, they are not. Or rather, there is remarkable variation in this. Health is one of the most highly regulated, which is why we're kind of, yeah, it is, Marin, yeah. It's very interesting. Adult school CTE programs were largely born of necessity, right? Talking with employer needs, talking with employers, understanding needs, and developing trainings to sort of put people into the workforce where the workforce where it was needed. There are certainly there are certainly different bodies that provide certifications, and I'd say that most of the ones that I'm aware of tend to develop curricula such that, yeah, folks get prepared to pass the sort of industry valued certifications. Welding is a good example of this. But in terms of curriculum or standards in a traditional sense, not necessarily, sometimes not at all. Uta, can you hop in on this one?
Yeah, so Beth makes a really important point, right? Flexibility and agility are two strengths that adult education providers have. Yes. Two things come to my mind with this, the graphic, the slide we see right now. I think that addresses also the question that Jill had way earlier, right? Did we discover gaps? Yes. How come there's only one program in one area? And why are there so many in another area across our region? Did we make adjustments to some? In a way, yes. We started to talk about creating the common language for welding programs, for example, which are much less industry regulated than health. Health is complex, but in comparison to some of the other training programs we provide, kind of easy to streamline because it's so heavily industry regulated and the requirements are somewhat clear. Mm-hmm. So for welding, for example, we are trying to start talking about shared language and determine what are the reasons we need to have to be able to explain to a student why is this 8 weeks and the other one is 16 weeks when the outcome seems to be the same. Why is one has a fee of 300 and the other one has a fee of 900 when the outcome seems to be the same, right? So, which might in our adult school systems also lead to conversations about why are we charging different fees at different schools? Interesting conversation to have, not an easy one. And also, are there certain programs, and that is also a very difficult conversation, that we want to let go of at one adult school because it's offered in a different shape and form at another adult school, based on the needs of our students. So currently, we are thinking about in my consortium to hand over a really well-developed construction program to another consortium, right? So we have the business partners, we have an awesome curriculum, we have an instructor. However, we don't have the students for it, right? So we know that another consortium has the students. So this kind of exchange and leveraging resources might become more and more important for us. Right? And adult schools sometimes in the past, and none of them in this room has ever, nobody in this room has ever done that, but some adult schools also just run training programs because they have always done it. Right? This work helps us all to develop a common understanding how to transform, right? How to work with a business partner and realign, redevelop, redesign our programs. Heather put some comments in on medical programs. Yes, but I just wanted to point out, right? This conversation also helps us to together reshape what it is we're doing in the adult education sector, right? So this theme of the summit is the power is yours. It's actually the power is ours, right? So I think this tool helps us to have these discussions.
So there are a couple, and thank you, Jeff, a couple of comments here. Heather, to your point, yeah, absolutely. Health is, you're saying, is one of the areas where there's a lot of, regulation and such, and where there are, accrediting boards, yeah, I know adult school worth their salt isn't designing courses toward them. But yeah, but outside of health, it can be the Wild West, right? Depending on the program area. And so, but that is a really good reminder. And then Yulene, you mentioned, yeah, West Ed did something similar, aligning CAPE pathways, coding alignment person. It could have been us actually, but it could also be what you're referring to as some work that the larger scale work that we did, where it was trying to gather kind of an inventory for the state, and that is one of the things that kind of helped inform the more local work that we're doing. There's a big difference between sort of once you high level paints one picture, local often looks very different. And that did end up informing a tool, I forget what it's called. I always forget what it's called, but I can find it. It's out there. I know that it's often a part of some of the webinars that Blair and Randy do. Yeah. Oh, and I totally skipped Karen, I'm so sorry. But you are remembering correctly. Just sort of at a different scale. Same fee, same classes. To echo Uta, no. Yeah, not at all. But anyway, let's see here. I'm gonna go ahead and move forward here. Let me just see. Okay, Uta, do you want to talk about what comes next?
Yes, and in a way we touched on it already throughout our conversation and the awesome chat input. We continue to refine the process and workflows. So every time we look, we come together, look at the repository and sort out where are the gaps, what do we offer where. We discover items we also need to discuss, right? Where, wait a minute, what is with the pricing? Wait a minute, what is with the description? And what is exactly the right code for it? And who is responsible, right? So I think it's important to stress, this is an investment, time, energy, focus. So each consortium committed to having responsible roles, responsibilities assigned to this project. We explore ways to use the data to inform our planning and engage stakeholders. What has worked well for our consortium and the super region is that we can now go to employers, business partners, and say, this is what we currently offer. Here's an overview, which is much more helpful, we find out, for our business partners than saying, well, adult school A has this, adult school B has that. We have one comprehensive document that provides an effective overview for our business partners. We want to continue that process. And of course, then also leverage shared knowledge and continue horizontal and vertical alignment, which is absolutely crucial, right? So that a student in the future can continue her training regardless of where she lives, right? If I have to move from East County to South Bay, I need to be able to take my training with me and continue my training without having to start all over again. So these are the next steps we work on. There are other consortia out there in the state of California who work on comparable projects. We also want to be in conversation with them. And Joe mentioned it earlier, I think, that there are many of us interested in this type of work, aligning horizontally and vertically. When all of us think about it, I'm curious what others in the audience think needs to happen next.
And I would imagine, and I think it's okay to hop off mute here.
And maybe we can also share the program finder link.
All right, let me grab.
Yeah, definitely.
All right.
I will put that in the chat. Let me pull the full link up. Does somebody want to address Marin's question while I pull up that link? Or I'll just, yeah, I want to give him the full link.
Sorry, I was muted there. Let's see, with adult school pathways that are IELCE or IET, or there is an EL Civics objective, work preparation, etc. We submit an IELCE program, of course, part of the SIP. SIP plans, build pathways into courses. That's exactly true. We have to create MOUs for internships. Yep. Wondering if we had a template for this work, MOUs, etc., it would be more uniform across the state for adult school pathways. I think that's a great idea. You know, I've seen, let's see. MOUs for as well for internships. The MOU, who's the MOU with? With the college or with who's providing the internships? Yeah, that's Kim. I'm glad you mentioned that. It's yeah, just sort of speaking to the MOU thing. I worked with a group a few years ago who were able to develop a regional MOU, and it took 3 years. And if I'm on, and it was for one pathway, which isn't to say there isn't a reason to do it. It's just there we go within the adult school. Oh, Marin, I see what you mean. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. It is a complicated endeavor. And it sort of seems so easy conceptually, but once you start getting into the details of what has to occur, you really understand how even within the same system, there are complexities that have to be navigated in, sensitive ways, right? and, you know, shared understanding and appreciation for the differences and nuances of how folks have to do things. You know, I think it's really easy to, yeah. I think, in fact, as I'm thinking about it, that's probably a really important outcome too. It's just learning to appreciate what those differences are, as opposed to just sort of from without making judgments based on what you do versus what I do. Sort of make the transition to what do we do, right? Training on how to write MOU. You know what? That is a fantastic idea. I love it. What other questions do folks have? Actually, I think we can go to this one. Anything that we can sort of help to clarify or and put it back? Any advice that you might give to us as we move forward? Analytics and Suzanne, do you want to address Euleen's question?
You know, there are analytics, and we do keep that up, but I don't have that information here. I'm actually at another, the California Economic Summit right now, so I don't have all my resources here handy. But we do track that in that website, and like I said, the idea as we move forward is to have separate little icons to show whether it's a community college or an adult ed program or a K-12 program. And we'd be able to dig down to the same type of data that you see here for the community colleges.
Which itself too is pretty complicated, right? As we were talking about bi-direct.
Yeah, there's a lot of different data to bring together. And so it's a process, but we're taking our time with it and with our vendor and making sure that it all, with participation from our adult ed folks and K-12 and community colleges, that we all see the information that we want counselors and students and parents to have access to before we publish it widely.
It's funny. It reminded me that this idea of let's just put adult ed in here too. Just it unearthed all kinds of assumptions that, again, really highlight the need for the conversations and the work that's being done. Even just the simply, well, where do, in Program Finder, where should we put the adult schools? And right, because there were also high school programs there listed in the previous version. And it's a reasonable thing to say, well, adult schools fall under school districts, they should go under school districts. To which, everyone said, no, what? And it's like, oh, sorry, so there's just a lot of learning that has to occur. And because we also understand that it's not linear, and because we understand that adult school offerings aren't just, adult schools also provide, courses and programs that can augment what's happening at a college, right? We want to be able to think about, well, how do we connect in like a sort of a visual way in a tool like a Program Finder, highlight where it's not even on and off ramps are, but where it is that a student can advance their program in their careers or academic or professional careers coextensively, right? So if the college isn't offering, you're in community college and you're in a program, professional program, but they're not providing training for passing certification exam, right? An area adult school does. Can you do this to you? That kind of thing. There are a few questions here. Uta, what?
Yeah, I wanted to respond to Jill and second that, emphasize it, repeat it. Our conversations about this repository started with students and our feeling that we're not serving them well enough. right? How do we prepare better for what the students can achieve and what they need? That can be employment in a meaningful job, that can be college, right? So what was driving this conversation was not how is this working for the program, for the colleges, for the schools, but rather, what do we need to do to make this useful for our students so that they can navigate a really complex system that is never ever linear and often doesn't acknowledge enough they are living their lives, right? So sometimes in our conversations that gets a little bit lost, but the focus on SOC, on the occupational codes, is always a good sort of resetting the stage, resetting our approach, and reminding ourselves what we want to do. So the student ideally sees jobs that are currently available and can decide which one would I want to have, which one might I be able to do right away? Is there something for me to explore? And then what are the programs that can support the student, right? So it's really rigorous backward design that starts with the student. And adult students are, as we know, different from high schoolers or college students. So we also talked in our meetings about, can we really fit them into the program finder as it is right now? Or do we need to reconsider certain mechanisms because we want to meet the needs and interests of an adult learner? So I think it's really important for us in adult education to keep that in mind, that this is a learner we want to acknowledge and address intentionally all the time.
Into that, we in education, and particularly in post-secondary, and I'm saying this as a former English professor, we can be really well-intentioned, but myopic, because we spend our days thinking about, the thing that we have studied to be able to teach, thinking about, the experiences, we might have in a classroom, and the challenges of, helping students become prepared for whatever comes next, that we don't really pause to think, am I helping this person in front of me get to where it is that they want to get to? Not as opposed to making them learn the thing that you're teaching, right? And et cetera. And so indeed, Uta, to echo what she had said there too, it's just by placing the focus on where students are going, right? In a concrete way, not in the abstract, well, they need all these skills to do all this stuff, right? Yeah, that's all true, but there's a lifetime to learn skills, right? What they also have needs that are valid, right? And you have to respect those. But anyway, thank you, Patricia. Uta, Suzanne, did you want to sort of take us out?
Well, for me, I would just say thank you all so much for being here today. And the questions are great. It really helps us to inform additional questions that we need to ask ourselves as we're doing this work. We also, are super happy for feedback from all of you. You are all, on the boots, on the ground doing this work, and our students, what they need to know. So please feel free to reach out. Greg, in fact, if you can go to the next slide, it has our contact information. So please feel free to reach out if you have questions or if you have suggestions for how we can improve the work that we're doing. So I'll pass it over to Uta.
Same here. Thank you for making us think further. Thank you for being such good thought partners. These questions are important. We have a lot to do and say in adult education. Reach out to us with your ideas, questions. There is always potential for extending those collaborations beyond the region and into other areas. Thank you.
I think Uta froze. Always potential for improvement, right?
Yes.
Like,
all right.
or recommendation, advice, we'll take that too. Thank you all. I'm going to stop sharing. Is there anything, Patricia, that housekeeping wise that needs doing?
I don't think so. I put the link to the evaluation in the chat. I mean, we do still have about 10 minutes if anybody else has questions before you guys finish up.
Might be lunchtime.
Yeah.
It's always good to find a few extra minutes in your day. So, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Suzanne, and thanks, Greg. Appreciate your time and just the work and the prep that you did for this work for the presentation. Just love all the graphics, and so many of us are very visual, and so it really helps, you know. And you're right, it's a long time-consuming work, right?
Absolutely, and ongoing.
It is ongoing, and it's a deeper dive, not just the surface level, but I don't know how deep, but you know, like 2,000 league under the sea kind of thing. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, it sounds like nobody else has any questions, so I'll go ahead and end a few minutes early. Thank you guys for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol.